Everybody, welcome to another drive-through board game blog. Today I've got another top 10 list for you. I did promise that I would do a few more through this year. A couple of things. One thing, I did mention that I would be doing the top 10 music albums or artists or something, and I've been kind of playing with that one over the last few weeks. I'm not going to do that. I know I said I would. I usually do what I say, but I hate ranking music. I hate ranking games, I'll be honest with you. I like, talking about games and talking about what's good and bad, but I really don't like, in a lot of instances, top 10s and things like that. I think in this kind of case, today I'm doing it, I think it's kind of a fun top 10. When I do the end of year, best of year list, that's really stickly for me. I'm kind of breaking down a little bit of my own barriers and principles to a degree, mostly for just means of transmitting the information of the games I really liked. When I take a step back and I'm kind of just take a break from the whole reviewer bit in my brain, I hate that. I don't like ranking that because to me games are pieces of art, and yes, some work mathematically better than others, but once you get through that whole mess and you just get to something that works and something that works and something that works, then comparing those is kind of weird. But I found, and this is something that I've stuck with me since as long as I can remember, that I really despise and detest ranking music above all things. I mean, even movies, I can kind of deal with it, and games to a degree I can deal with it. But music, for some reason, if you had to ask me, what my favorite kind of hobbies were, or whatever my interests that are sort of superficial in some ways, but it would be games, and it would also be music, maybe more than games in a lot of ways, even though that doesn't really make sense because I do videos about games and not music. But I think music is so ingrained in myself and lots of people, I mean most people I would say, I don't like ranking it. So that's not going to happen. I can't do it. I can't do it at all because music is just such life to me. It's just art and breathing and everything. So that's not going to happen. I will maybe do top 10 comic books because then I don't take it seriously as I take music, obviously. So I might do that or something to substitute that in. The other thing is this is going to be kind of released at the same time as a podcast with Eric Teo of the Push Your Luck podcast. We actually talked about the top 7 underrated games. Now there is actually some crossover between that list and this one, which is my top 10 guilty pleasure games. So I won't spoil what the crossover is, but there's a little bit of crossover. But some folks had asked me specifically to do this list, and Eric had mentioned, hey, let's do a top 10 underrated, top 7. So I kind of thought it was interesting to sort of look at the difference in where the crossover is and isn't. Because underrated is a game I feel like is good, but it should be rated higher, probably at least that it is on Board Game Geek. And guilty pleasure is I think it's good, but I'm pretty sure a lot of other people don't, and I'm kind of okay with that. So it's different, but kind of the same. So I'll put links to that here. We're going to kind of release them at the same time, thereabouts. And so I'll have links to his podcast in there. And also, I just wanted to mention as a little plug for Eric, he did visit the New York Toy Fair recently, and he'll be putting up some videos and interviews with publishers and things along that line. I don't know details, but he will put that up, and I'll put some links to his channel there. So let's jump into the top 10 guilty pleasure games after all of that to do. First, honorable mention, I will do one. It is Tesla versus Edison, War of Currents. And the reason it's an honorable mention is because I do see that the designer, at least to a degree, is aware of some of the issues that some people have with the game, and they are coming out with an expansion and playtesting some different, I don't know if you'd call them variants, but a little tweaks to the gameplay. A lot of folks have issue with kind of how the stock market works, and I will say that within my own game group, some folks have had issue with the stock market, and others, myself, and not only myself, but others have also enjoyed how that works and had a great time with the game. So I will just leave that as an honorable mention. I definitely am going to hold on to it and wait for the expansion to see what kind of tweaks and stuff that are coming there. They've kind of spoiled a little bit in terms of what they're trying to play test on Board Game Geek and all that stuff. But I would say this is kind of a guilty pleasure because I do understand that a lot of people have some issue with just how overbearing and dramatic really the stock market is, but that's I like that. I mean, that's the thing I kind of live for. The rest of the game kind of feels a little bit superfluous, but I think that's okay. And I kind of like that. That's kind of a hard thing to pin down. Sometimes you have a heavy anchor, you know, weighing down on a game. The one thing that comes to mind is a Nautilus, which has this crazy like doubler turn thing. So you take your actions and you build your ships in that game. And then you have this one kind of massive activation that you can just do everything twice. Being very, you know, short in terms of that. That's not quite accurate, but it's pretty much like you get this one massive turn, you've got to decide when to pull the trigger. And for some reason that fell flat with me. So sometimes a heavy anchor kind of, you know, dictating the rest of the game is good, and sometimes it's not, and it's going to depend on the folks. So number 10 is Exploding Kittens, and this is definitely a guilty pleasure game. Now this game is actually fun, and the reason it's fun, you can go watch my review, is because when you draw an Exploding Kitten card from the deck, you're basically dead, you're out of the game. But if you have a diffuse, you can diffuse it, you get rid of the diffuse card, it's gone forever, and then you put the kitten, the Exploding Kitten, back into the deck. Now you could put it right on top of the deck, you could stick it at the bottom of the deck, you could put it one card down from the top, you could throw it in the middle, and that is just hilarious. And it's silly fun. There is a little bit of, not hand management, but a little bit of kind of card counting and sort of building up a card advantage, if you will, to, you know, skip turns and do all kinds of stuff like that. But that little mechanic there of, hey, I'm going to take the kitten, put it back on the deck, hand you the deck, and say, where did I put the kitten? And you just kind of look at the person dead in the eye, and just that makes for a fun, silly moment. And I think that is overlooked to some ways. I would definitely not say this one is underrated, obviously, because it's kind of silly, and it's a little bit of a one-note punch there. But it's fun, and we brought it out a couple of times over the last year and just had a good time with it. So I do feel like it is a guilty pleasure because we played at lunch at work and we all laugh and have a good time, and it's just silly. So that's number 10. Number 9 is the new Versus System 2-player card game, because I think the game is excellent. I do feel like this LCG style of game is not something that I normally can get played very often. So I get it out once in a while and play it online a little bit. I think the game is going to get the expansion that it needs soon. There was actually a delay. They had some issues with the card quality. It was supposed to have been out already as the time of this recording. And I think it's going to be another month, maybe even a little bit more from what I understand. The spoiling of the cards that they've done for the expansion has me really excited. And I've talked to several people that are really into this game as well, and they're really excited about it. Because one, the critique that I've heard levied against the base game is it's a little bit easy mode, basic mode. Yes and no. I mean, there's not a lot of like digging for cards and kind of crazy combinations of cards, but there's a lot of strategy in terms of how you formate your heroes and villains and all that stuff on the board and all that. So there's a little bit under the covers there that I think, you know, one play is certainly not going to give you. But I think there's going to be some cool, crazy combos and some very thematic abilities, and there's going to be very cool characters in this upcoming expansion. A lot of the Netflix superheroes. So there's some Daredevil and Punisher. There's no Jessica Jones, which, you know, that's disappointing, but, you know, what are you going to do? Maybe she'll be in a future set. At least that I know of. There might be a Jessica Jones that they haven't spoiled yet. Luke Cage card and some other things. So it looks really, really cool, and I kind of feel like it's a guilty pleasure because nobody on Board Game Geek talks about this at all, but there's a big, massive Facebook group dedicated to the Versus System trading card game, or a 2-player card game, I should call it. More than 1,000 people now, and there's quite an active community. There's some trolls on there too, but most of us are pretty active and positive about the game and have a good time with it. And so there's a lot of good folks on there. So that's what gaming is all about, of course, community. And so we have a great time with it, and the game needs to be talked about more. So it's a little bit underrated, but it's also kind of a guilty pleasure because it's sort of just kind of off on its own. That was number 9. Number 8 is Sons of Anarchy. And this one is a guilty pleasure, but I also feel like this one's a little bit underrated and overlooked. I don't really see many people talking about this. There are a few folks that I know that have reviewed it and reviewed it favorably, which of course I agree with. And it's kind of one of those games that it's a little bit dark, I think, for a lot of people, because it's kind of like a reality crime game. A lot of crime games, they've got your kind of cartoonish mafia folks. There's several games like that. You know, and it's kind of set in the past, so it's a little bit, you know, hands off. You can kind of distance yourself from it because it took place like in the 20s and 30s or whatever. So that's long, you know, a generation or few past. Whereas Sons of Anarchy is very much a modern, brutal, visceral crime type of thing. There's drugs depicted, prostitution, you know, illegal pornography and stuff like that. Now, there's no imagery in the game that would, you know, suggest any of that necessarily. I mean, it's not like overtly X-rated or anything, but all of that is very plain, and that's what you're doing, and that's the role that you take. And so that's very dark, and it you know, it's an awful thing, but it's also, it's an escapist kind of thing. And there's a lot of brutal sort of, you know, combat, and it's kind of like a Euro game in some places where you have like worker placement and, you know, area control. You're trying to take over territory, you're killing other biker gang members, and you're trying to sort of lock down and control the different crime, you know, businesses in the different areas and stuff like that, and try to keep the heat down and stay away from the police and sell drugs and sell guns and use guns in combat. So there's a little bit of guilt. Not really. I mean, anyway, that's a psychology argument, but not guilt necessarily in playing the game, but it's sort of a guilty pleasure, you know, going into that sort of dark underworld and playing crime in a way that is a little bit more realistic-ish. I mean, it's a little bit also sensationalized and glorified in a way that's probably not healthy, depending on who you are playing the game. Anyway, that so it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it. It's a really excellent game with kind of a mix mash of you know, Euro and dice combat, and so it's a lot of fun. So that is number, let's see, 10, 9, 8. Number 7 now will be Space Cadets. This is one that I do 100% feel is underrated. It is an interesting game, and to me it's strange that it's not in the top 100, to be honest with you, because there's not any game like this. You know, each player has their own, you know, role that they get, and their role is very much an asymmetric mechanic that is distant and apart from all the other roles. So if I'm shooting stuff, I'm flicking discs, I'm putting together this sort of like targeting matrix of Tetris pieces. If I'm running the sensor like Uhura, you know, you're digging through this bag, kind of blindly feeling, you know, sort of like sensing out. You've also got like a radar track kind of thing where you have the tractor beam where you're looking at the different tiles, and it's kind of like a memory game. You've got this kind of like poker hand thing for the shield. So all these different mechanics of Robo Rally for the cards movement. It's like a programmed card movement kind of thing. And when the game has gone off for me, it is just an absolute riot. You know, people are doing different things. People are yelling at you for missing or for flying us into an asteroid, or hooping and hollering when we, you know, blow the other ship out of the sky or make it to the end of the mission. Fantastic game. And there's part of me that understands, because so many people bring it up that must be true, right? Where they say it takes a long time to play, it takes a long time to teach. That hasn't been my experience. To me, as a person that seems to always be teaching the game, as the captain, I kind of do very little. Kind of manage, you know, all the different roles, but I can teach all the different individual roles and then just jump into the game and everybody's good to go, and then we're off and running. We do bad the first couple rounds, and then, you know, everything gets good. So personally, that's not been my experience, but I understand, since I hear it enough, that the experience of some folks is it's a lot to take in, a lot of different rules, a lot to digest. So I get that. So I can understand why it is not ranked. I mean, it's not like it's horribly ranked. You know, a lot of people don't hate it, I don't think. I'm sure some do. But I get it. I get it. Some people don't like it. And that's okay. So number 6 is a Sentinel Tactics. This is one of my favorite games of all time, for sure, right up there with Space Cadets. And this is one that I am a little bit interested about, because the designers and publishers have mentioned that they're going to kind of revisit Sentinel Tactics. So I think it's another one. I haven't really seen anything super negative about it, and I don't know why it isn't more liked. I don't worry too much about it, but I haven't seen anybody really slag on it. The combat system is very interesting. The different decks for the different characters and heroes and villains is really interesting. That whole mechanic of like having 2 powers to choose. Just the presentation of it is really good in terms of like playing through comic books or, you know, just building up squads and going at each other. Now, the miniatures aren't the greatest in the world, so I might be getting a little bit of slog, I guess, because if you're a miniatures gamer, you'd probably look at it and be like, oh, this is bad, and just kind of go from there. I don't know. I don't think I've necessarily seen that. But they are saying that they're going to revisit it a little bit, so I'm a little bit curious about that. Maybe they found some things through some of the complaints and stuff. There's a few things I really like about it. It's relatively quick to set up for this kind of game, kind of a skirmish miniature combat game. The rules are very easy to teach. The dice mechanic is really engaging, like I said, and also the card mechanic is really engaging. But you can get a game of this played in about 30 to 45 minutes. And that's really neat because it'll play quick and fast, and it plays much quicker and faster than much of the other games kind of in this genre. So I like that about it. So it makes it easy to play it kind of back to back as well. And I just find that the combination of the mechanics, the dice, and the cards really is very thematic. So if you've got somebody that kind of flies around and, you know, kind of buffs everybody up, then that's really a different way that the mechanics work versus if you're like the Flash type of character, you're going to speed around, and you know that's very different. And the different villains have kind of different modes and things that they can get into. I'm trying to think of different stuff. Like the Raw character is very much a direct damage character. So just everybody has that same kind of core mechanics, but just the little tweaks and everything are very thematic, and they work very well, and they make a lot of sense, and they give you that real superhero sense, which I've always kind of been looking for in a game. There's plenty of games nowadays that have like superheroes in them, but this one really feels like the superhero game to me. All right, that was number 6, and number 5 is Relic, and this is basically Talisman in the 40K universe, and really, I think by rights I should not like this game, and sometimes I have a hard time figuring out why I enjoy this game. And I think it's just one of those games where you can kind of like turn your brain off to a degree and then just kind of play it and let the game play you a little bit. Now, as those words leave my mouth, there's a certain falsehood to them because there is room for decision making. There is definite, sort of easy sort of choices to make in the game, and you can kind of go different ways, with your character, and you can play now with all the expansions the game in several different ways. And it has a sense of adventure to it that I can't quite put my finger on, but it's interesting to kind of build up your character. You get new items, you can kind of build up your stats and explore, in a sense, the board and bounce around and find different monsters, let the game kind of take shape, and then you kind of have a little bit more decisions to go on, and you can kind of stay away from one part of the board and go to the other, and you're worried about Billy over there racing up and he's getting ahead of you for whatever the objective might be, because the objective can change every game. And so it's just kind of one of those silly fun games in a lot of ways, kind of like Exploding Kittens, but just to a different degree that I really have a good time with. So number 4 is Impulse, as a crawl shot game. And this is one that maybe 50% of the people I play it with like it, and the other 50% don't really care for it. I love the game. I think it's a lot of fun. It does a great job of doing this like 4X space exploration, empire building in a card game in less than an hour. Unless you play with like 6 players, then it's going to go over an hour probably. But really fun, fast, chaotic to a degree, but there definitely is room to maneuver and do strategies and try to play a little bit tactically with this game, and it's really, really enjoyable. It does have some of those more dramatic moments in terms of the combat and the card play. Now, I can understand that a lot of people find it chaotic, and that's fine. I don't. This one I don't really see the chaotic viewpoint. I understand it that people are going to have that viewpoint, and that's fine. Like, I get it. I get that people find it chaotic, but it's not at all to me. To me, it's all about knowing the deck of cards and learning all that stuff, and that takes a couple of plays to get in through, but you can certainly make decisions based on what you know in the game. That may or may not pay off, but you might get close. So, we'll talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, so that I like Impulse a lot. Now, number 3 is Dark, Darker, Darkest. And the reason this is not more liked, I think, is because their first rule book was missing rules and a little bit unplayable, and they made a tweak to how fire works in the game. But I really enjoy this. You got to get the second edition rules. I've said that 100 times on this channel. But it's a really fun Resident Evil, the board game style game. You go into a big mansion with you and your other heroes, and you play in this modular configurable mansion, and you're trying to get at one of a couple possible boss monsters, kind of like a video game, and you're going through and trying to unlock, different locks and putting together these like cool little combos. So it has like that it's kind of like Resident Evil, but also like those click adventures like Monkey Island. It's like super abstracted though. We're like, okay, I got this color key here with this one. I can go all the way back over here, unlock this. And once you unlock all the stuff, you trigger like the boss mode, and then you flip up one of the random bosses, and the boss goes terrassing through the house and just destroying everything. So you've got to kill that at the end. And the way that the map kind of is built at the beginning of the game, it really is going to kind of dictate your skirmish style tactics and the way the zombies spawn and the way the fire spreads. So there is some agency that the players are given to dictate style of game that you're going to play. You could have like a large room with a bunch of zombies or lots of little corridors, and so every time you kind of play the house, it's a little bit sort of like I guess not really like a roguelike, but kind of like, in Diablo 2 you'd play it and you'd go into the dungeon and be like, oh, it's a little bit differently laid out this time, but it actually has more meaning in here with the layout. But yeah, definitely take a look at this one if you can find it, and you can probably find it for cheap. The number 2 is Aeroplanes, and this is a Martin Wallace game from Mayfair, and it is about the airline industry in Europe, kind of at the dawn of the airline industry, and a lot of people seem to not like it. Well, I've played it with my group, and I don't think anybody in my group doesn't like it. They may not be their most favorite game, but everybody I've played it with has really enjoyed it. I think at the 5-player count, some folks were kind of iffy on that. I do remember distinctly playing a 5-player game or 2 back when it came out, and there were some people that kind of grumbled a little bit about it, just because you could there could be a little bit of time between your turns. But definitely at the 3 and 4-player count, which I've mostly played it at, I haven't really heard any complaints, and actually the family really enjoys this one. Now there is some definite luck, because you're kind of rolling your dice and expanding your airport network, going on these kind of risky flights, possibly to large and distant places that are more and more difficult to get to. But I like that. It's got a nice thematic quality, sort of the initial troubles of airline travel, and just kind of setting up a sort of business model in a sense. Dealing with the catastrophes of flying different places and weather, and of course the quality of the airplanes back then. But there's a lot of mitigation and stuff that you can do, lots of planning. There's a little bit of cutthroatiness to sort of steal other people's airports and sort of upgrade them, sort of expand your flights. I guess it's not really your airports, of course. It's like you're getting the flights out of that city and stuff. So there's a lot of cool mechanics and stuff like that. It doesn't look the prettiest, because it's kind of in the stage that Mayfair's in, especially at that point in time where their components weren't that great. They seem to have been kind of improving actually last year. But really an enjoyable game, and I think definitely overlooked for sure in terms of how it plays out. I think there's some good stuff in that game for sure. That was number 2. Number 1 is Urban Sprawl. This is one of my favorite games again, and I do also understand why people don't like this game, because you can have these random events come up in the town deck. And so this is a game where you're building a city, kind of like Sim City in a way. Not really, but you are collectively building a city with other players and trying to win political office and kind of set up different types of buildings on the board. Businesses, and also like more residential and civic buildings as well, and trying to make them yours. So when different election cycles come up, you can sort of reap the advantage of, you know, owning different building types and different sectors and stuff. Now, there's a lot of random events that come up through the cards, and so you can have a stack of like a bunch of events that happen one after the other. I don't necessarily have a big problem with that at all. Once you play the game a couple times, you know what's in there, so you can kind of know to set up and try to put yourself in the best position possible. Now, a game that I've been playing a lot recently is Through the Ages, and I didn't really realize this before, but this Urban Sprawl really reminds me of Through the Ages in a lot of ways, because you have this kind of row of cards that you're drafting, and you're trying to you take those and then you play them to sort of build up your engine in a way, but then you have these kind of events. Now, Through the Ages, you get the events dealt to you, and then you can see them into the deck, and they'll come out randomly. But this is like somebody's just seeded all the events for you, and you don't know what order they're going to come out. But once you know what the events are, you can try to set yourself up in a position to, you know, score on those opportunities better than the other players. And you've got to be real mindful about managing, you know, how you put the buildings out in a way that will generate money for you, so you can kind of keep your like kind of engine going. But again, you're trying to really plan for these elections and set yourself up to kind of have like a dominance or area control there. Now, at first blush, the game is going to seem like super chaotic or random, but once you get into it, like I said, then it becomes very, very interesting. And I like it because it's a city building game where not everybody also has their own little city off on their own. You're competing directly for space. You're trying to be sort of this kind of slimy, you know, guy in a suit working with City Hall, or in City Hall in some cases, and trying to, you know, suck out all of the money and power of a city, just like lots of people like to do. So I like that aspect, that you're kind of in there competing, but also cooperatively, and maybe accidentally, building up a city, you know, that is prosperous. You're going from sort of a small kind of town up into a city at the end of the game that could actually be capable of hosting the Olympic Games, for example. So it's interesting to see how that works, kind of the growth of that city over time and all that kind of stuff too. But again, I do see that people would play the game, you know, once or twice and maybe feel like it's chaotic and, you know, a little bit random for sure. But it's a game I've really enjoyed, and I will say probably best at 2 or 3 for sure. It's excellent in a 2-player game, but it's okay at 4, but that's going to go a little bit long and stuff, so I can see kind of the chaos versus the length. But it's not any more chaotic than Through the Ages, I don't think. All right, I know I'm going to take some hits for that, but I've been playing Through Ages for a lot lately, and I've seen lots of games decided by the row of cards. So, all right, so that's my top 10 guilty pleasure games. These are games that I really like, but I can kind of see, you know, how other people don't really like them. So definitely take a look at Eric's and my other podcasts about the underrated games. You know, some of these are for sure on there. And those are kind of more like, I feel a little bit more certain that, hey, these are just overlooked. These are actually good games. You know, take another look at them and that kind of thing. Where some of these, like Exploding Kittens, for example, like, you know, whatever. Don't play that if you don't want to, obviously. But yeah, there you go. Thanks.